There are certain things you witness while working in a cemetery that never leave you. Things that make you question everything you thought you understood about life, death, and what might linger in between. What happened with the Thompson couple is one of those things, and it still haunts me to this day. If you're ready for a story that will crawl under your skin and stay there, subscribe to the channel. My name is Robert Mitchell. I've been the director of Greenwood Memorial Cemetery for 12 years. In that time, I've seen grief in every form, raw, angry, quiet, crushing. You learn to sense the difference between the grief that eventually softens and the kind that eats a person alive. I should have trusted those instincts when it came to Daniel Thompson. Daniel was a regular, if you can even call it that. Every Sunday, without fail, he'd arrive at 2:30 p.m. sharp. Same blue Honda Civic. Same parking spot under the big oak tree in Section C. He never missed a week. Rain, snow, blazing July heat, it didn't matter. Daniel was always there. His wife, Maria, had died in a car crash on Route 9. She was only 34. I've buried hundreds of people, but that funeral, it broke me a little. Daniel just stood there like his soul had been ripped out, staring at her casket like he'd forgotten how to breathe. He was 36, far too young to look that hollow. But what set him apart wasn't just his loss, it was his ritual. Every Sunday, Daniel came with 2 coffee cups from Murphy's Diner. He'd walk to Maria's grave in Section D, sit on the cold stone bench, place 1 cup on her headstone, and keep the other in his hands. Then he'd talk to her. For 2 full hours. Not a minute less. The first time I noticed this, it was about 3 weeks after the funeral. I was doing my usual rounds, and I saw him there, murmuring to the headstone with 2 coffees sitting between them. At first, I thought maybe he was waiting for a relative, but week after week, it was the same. Just Daniel and Maria's grave, as if she were sitting right there beside him. I never interrupted. Grief is private. The last thing a man like Daniel needed was me hovering with some hollow condolences. Still, I watched him, from a distance. Partly because it was my job, partly because something about his devotion pulled me in. Spring passed into summer, and his ritual shifted in ways that worried me. At first, his Sundays were full of tears. Not loud sobbing, but the quiet, steady kind that shakes your whole body. His voice would break as he tried to tell Maria about his week. Sometimes, he'd reach out and trace her name on the granite, fingertips trembling like he was trying to feel her through the stone. By summer, the tears stopped. His conversations grew steadier, more casual, like the kind you'd hear between any married couple over breakfast. He'd tell her about work, annoying clients, the new restaurant opening on Main, even the neighbor's cat that kept sleeping on their porch. It almost sounded normal, except for the fact that she wasn't there. That's when I noticed his appearance changing. He dropped at least 15 pounds. His clothes hung loose, his face looked tired, worn down. By late summer, the mood shifted again. He still came every Sunday. Still brought 2 coffees. Still sat for exactly 2 hours. But now, he barely spoke. He'd sit in silence, fingers tight around his cup, eyes locked on her headstone with an intensity that unsettled me. Sometimes, his hand would lift slowly, like he was reaching for someone's invisible hand resting on the bench beside him. That's when I really started to worry. I'd seen enough grief in 12 years to recognize the dangerous kind, the kind that traps you in the past so tightly, you stop looking forward. Daniel was slipping. I thought about talking to him, maybe suggesting he see Pastor Williams or Dr. Chen, the grief counselor we refer families to. But every time I came close, something held me back. Maybe it was respect for his privacy. Maybe it was my own discomfort with getting too close to someone else's pain. Either way, I stayed quiet. And that silence still eats at me. By autumn, Daniel's visits became even more troubling. He began bringing personal items to leave at Maria's grave. One week, it was a paperback romance novel. Another, a potted violet, carefully placed by the marker. Once, I saw him set down a jewelry box, open it, and leave it there for his entire visit before taking it back home. But it was the suitcase that chilled me. That was the moment I knew something was terribly wrong. It was late March, one of those strange spring days when the weather can't make up its mind. The morning was bright, almost warm, but by noon, dark clouds were rolling in, thick and heavy. The air felt charged, like a storm was waiting to break. Around 2:15, I heard Daniel's Civic pull into the lot. Usually, I'd hear the quick slam of his door, his footsteps crunching on gravel. But this time, there was a long pause. I glanced out my office window and saw him standing by his car, staring up at the sky with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then I saw it, the suitcase. Navy blue, brass corners. The kind of vintage luggage people used for honeymoons or cross-country trips in better times. He lifted it out of the trunk carefully, reverently, like it was something sacred. Even from my window, I could see this wasn't just any suitcase. Whatever was inside, it mattered. And for the first time in 12 years working at Greenwood, I felt a chill that didn't come from the weather. After 12 years managing the cemetery, you start to develop instincts for when something isn't right. It's not always something you can explain. It's more like a rhythm being disturbed, a silence that suddenly feels too heavy. That's exactly what I felt the moment I saw Daniel walking toward Section D that Sunday afternoon, suitcase in one hand, his usual 2 coffee cups in the other. Every professional instinct in me screamed this wasn't just another visit. Something about it was different. I tried focusing on paperwork, but I couldn't. My eyes kept drifting to the window. Daniel had reached Maria's grave and gone through his usual ritual. 1 coffee on the headstone for her, 1 for himself, settling quietly on the bench. But this time, the suitcase sat beside him like a third companion, and the way he sat, it was unnerving. He wasn't leaning forward like usual, talking in that quiet voice of his. Instead, he sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes locked on the headstone with an intensity that sent a shiver through me. By 3:30, the sky had grown dark. Thick clouds rolled overhead, and fat raindrops began to fall. Most people would have left, hurried to their cars for shelter, but Daniel didn't flinch. It was like he didn't even notice the rain. I grabbed an umbrella, telling myself I needed to check the drainage near the older graves, but truthfully, I wanted to get closer. Something about the scene unsettled me. As I walked towards Section D, the steady sound of rain filled the air. That's when I heard his voice. At first, I thought it was the same quiet conversations I'd overheard before, but this was different. His words tumbled out fast, urgent, like a man running out of time. I ducked behind a tall monument maybe 20 feet away and listened. I couldn't make out every word, but the desperation was unmistakable. It wasn't casual reminiscing anymore. It was pleading. Daniel's clothes were soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, but he didn't care. He kept talking, gripping that suitcase like it was his last anchor to the world. At one point, I clearly heard him say, "I brought everything you loved, Maria. Everything we shared." My chest tightened hearing that. I should have stepped forward then. Should have offered him shelter, a word, anything. But something held me back. Maybe it was the sacredness of what I was witnessing, or maybe it was fear of stepping too close to that raw, consuming grief. So instead, I walked back to my office and watched from the window as the storm poured down on him. By 5 p.m., hours past his usual time, Daniel was still there. The rain had grown into a relentless downpour, but he didn't move. I told myself I'd go insist he come inside, until I saw him stand up. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. Instead of heading to his car, Daniel knelt by the grave and opened the suitcase. My stomach dropped. From my window, I couldn't see exactly what was inside, but I watched as he pulled out item after item, placing them carefully around Maria's grave. Each object handled with reverence, like sacred offerings. It took him nearly 20 minutes to arrange everything, the rain soaking him the entire time. When he finished, he set the empty suitcase aside, sat back on the bench, and stared at the headstone in silence. He didn't speak another word. Just sat there, motionless, surrounded by fragments of their life together. Something about his posture felt final, like a man who had already said goodbye and was only waiting for the end. The storm finally broke around 7:30. The clouds parted, leaving the cemetery damp and quiet. But Daniel remained exactly where he was, still as a statue. By 9 o'clock, my unease had reached its breaking point. I was about to call the police for a wellness check when I saw him finally rise. Slowly, deliberately, he gathered each item, returned them to the suitcase, and walked back to his car. His headlights disappeared into the night, leaving me with a hollow pit in my chest. I told myself it was fine, that he just needed extra time. But deep down, where my instincts live, I knew I'd just witnessed something that felt like a final farewell. I should have acted. Should have found his number, called him, checked in. But I didn't. I went home, had dinner with my family, helped my daughter with homework, and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. The next morning was gray and drizzly. I arrived at the cemetery at 7:30 sharp to prepare for a 10 a.m. service for Mrs. Patterson, a sweet 93-year-old who'd passed peacefully in her sleep. That's when Tommy Rodriguez, our groundskeeper, came bursting into my office. Tommy's been here nearly as long as I have, quiet man, reliable, with a sharp eye for anything unusual. But that morning his face was pale, hands trembling. "Mr. Mitchell," he gasped, barely able to get the words out. "You need to come to Section D. Right now. It's Daniel. I think he's dead." The walk to Maria's grave felt endless, even though it was only a couple minutes. Tommy moved quickly, his usual calm stride replaced with frantic urgency. When we reached the bench, my heart sank instantly. Daniel sat slumped against the backrest, exactly where I'd last seen him the night before. But this time, there was no mistaking it. His stillness wasn't that of a man resting. His head was tilted slightly back, eyes closed, hands folded neatly in his lap. If not for the unnatural pallor of his skin, he might have looked like he'd simply dozed off. But Daniel Thompson wasn't sleeping. He was gone. There are protocols when you find a body on cemetery grounds. Secure the area. Call 911. Don't touch anything. I'd been through it before. An elderly man who collapsed by his wife's grave, a teenager who overdosed behind the maintenance shed. Both times, procedure had been enough. But standing over Daniel, I couldn't keep the same professional distance. This wasn't just another body. This was a man I had watched for months, whose grief I'd witnessed morph from anguish to obsession, from devotion to despair. As I sent Tommy to call 911, I noticed details that will haunt me forever. A small white envelope tucked beneath Daniel's folded hands. On the front, written in neat block letters, "To whom it may concern." On the ground beside the bench lay an empty prescription bottle with his name on it. And scattered around Maria's grave, placed with reverence, were the very items I'd seen him carry the day before. The story of their marriage, their love, their life, reduced to sacred relics surrounding the place where she rested, and now, where he had chosen to follow. The wedding photo sat at the center of the display, Daniel and Maria caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame. Around it were the keepsakes he had chosen carefully, a small jewelry box holding Maria's rings, a worn paperback copy of Pride and Prejudice stuffed with bookmarks made from ticket stubs and receipts, the CD of their wedding song, and a small orchid in a ceramic pot with a note reminding us it was Maria's favorite flower. The most heartbreaking detail was 2 delicate china coffee cups with faded floral patterns, the kind reserved for anniversaries or quiet mornings together, not the everyday thermal mugs Daniel used at Murphy's Diner. Police arrived within minutes, followed closely by paramedics and the county coroner. Detective Sarah Walsh quickly took control, moving with the calm precision of someone who had done this too many times. She photographed every item, logged the evidence, and interviewed Tommy and me about how we found Daniel's body and whether we had noticed any changes in his behavior recently. The envelope, resting neatly beside him, contained exactly what I feared, a suicide note. Written in Daniel's careful, almost formal handwriting, it explained he could no longer live without Maria. He asked forgiveness from anyone his decision would hurt and included funeral instructions. He wanted to be buried beside Maria in the plot he had quietly purchased months earlier. He even left behind a donation for the cemetery maintenance fund with one final request, that someone continue bringing coffee to Maria's grave every Sunday, just as he had done. The coroner later confirmed what the half-empty prescription bottle suggested. Daniel had died from a sleeping pill overdose, most likely in the early hours of the morning. No signs of struggle, no indication of anyone else's involvement. It was a straightforward case of a grieving widower who had chosen to end his life at the one place that still gave him comfort, by Maria's grave. And yet, Something about the scene unsettled me. Nothing that could be written in an official report, no broken timeline or suspicious mark, just a nagging feeling. Maybe it was the calm expression on Daniel's face, the way he had so carefully arranged Maria's belongings, or the fact that he chose the exact bench where he had spent countless Sundays speaking to her as if she were still alive. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the sense that Daniel's story didn't end neatly with his death. Within 48 hours, the investigation was closed. His body was released to the funeral home he had chosen, and preparations were made for Friday afternoon. Funerals for suicide victims are always heavy, but this one was particularly devastating. Daniel was well known in our small town, a quiet, kind man whose devotion to his wife was legendary. When the day came, the Methodist church was overflowing with people, co-workers, school friends, and neighbors who had watched Daniel and Maria's love story unfold from the beginning. Pastor Williams gave a eulogy that focused not on the tragedy, but on Daniel's life. He spoke about his dedication at work, his loyalty to friends, his quiet acts of kindness, and above all, his deep devotion to Maria. Tears flowed freely, but there was also a collective understanding in the room that Daniel's choice, though heartbreaking, was born from love rather than despair. At Greenwood Memorial, the burial service was short but deeply moving. Daniel's casket was positioned exactly where he had requested, right beside Maria. As the pastor spoke the final words and the casket was lowered, I noticed a single red rose resting on Maria's headstone. The gesture was simple, but it pierced through the grief in a way words couldn't. It was then, as mourners began to drift back to their cars, that I saw her. She stood about 30 feet away, partly hidden behind the Whitmore family monument. At first, I assumed she was just another mourner, maybe a former co-worker or distant family member I hadn't met. But something about her presence pulled at me. She wore a navy blue dress scattered with small white flowers, the same dress Maria had worn in that wedding photo Daniel often brought to her grave. Her auburn hair, cut to her shoulders with threads of gray catching the light, was styled in the same practical yet elegant way Maria always kept hers. The resemblance was striking, her height, her build, her age. And then I saw her face. My chest tightened. She didn't just look like Maria, she was Maria. Or at least she could have been. The same delicate features, the same soft smile edged with sadness, even the faint scar above her left eyebrow from the childhood bicycle accident Daniel once mentioned to me. I tried to convince myself she was a relative, a sister, a cousin. Families share resemblances after all. But her behavior unsettled me. While others crowded around Daniel's grave offering condolences, she stood apart, watching quietly with an expression that was both sorrowful and strangely peaceful. As the cemetery emptied, I made up my mind to speak with her. Partly out of professional duty, I made it a habit to meet unfamiliar visitors, but also because my curiosity had grown too strong. I stepped toward her, calling out gently, "Excuse me, miss. May I have a word?" She turned, almost as if she had been expecting me. For the first time, I saw her face clearly, without shadow or distance to blur the details. My breath caught again. This wasn't just resemblance. This woman was Maria, down to the smallest details. The sea-glass green eyes Daniel loved to describe, the tilt of her head when she listened, the exact warmth of her smile. "You're Mr. Mitchell, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft with a trace of a southern accent Daniel had often said Maria never lost from her Georgia childhood. "The cemetery director?" I nodded, words caught in my throat. She smiled faintly, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for taking such good care of Daniel all these months." I knew Daniel appreciated having someone who understood his grief. But when the woman in the navy dress said those words to me, it felt like a punch to the chest. How could she know about my quiet observations of Daniel's Sunday visits? How could she know I'd been keeping an eye on him, silently worrying each week as he sat by Maria's grave? And most of all, how could she be standing here, speaking to me, when Maria Thompson had been dead for 8 months? "I'm sorry," I stammered, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "I don't think we've met. Are you a relative of Maria's? Maybe her sister?" She smiled then. And it wasn't just any smile. It was Maria's exact smile, the one frozen in the wedding photo Daniel had shown me countless times. It was warm, gentle, the kind of smile Daniel once said had made him fall in love. "Something like that?" she replied softly. The answer was both confirmation and denial all at once. Then she added, "I just wanted you to know, Daniel isn't suffering anymore. He's at peace now. And so am I." Before I could process her words, before I could even ask her name, she turned and began to walk away. Panic surged through me. My professionalism gave way to pure, desperate curiosity. "Wait!" I called, hurrying after her. My voice echoed through the quiet cemetery. "Please, I need to ask you something. How did you know Daniel? How did you know about his visits?" But she never slowed. She moved with a steady, confident stride, weaving between headstones as though she knew every path by heart. I chased her all the way to the cemetery's main gate, my heart pounding with confusion and exertion. But when I reached the entrance, she was gone. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my car, Tommy's pickup, and the hearse still being loaded with flowers. No sign of the woman in the navy dress. No trace of where she'd gone. I stood there scanning both directions of the road, but it was as if she had dissolved into the air itself. The only thing left behind was a faint scent of jasmine, the same perfume Daniel once told me Maria loved. That evening, I stayed late. I told myself it was paperwork, but really, I was reviewing security footage. Greenwood Memorial had cameras covering every entrance and nearly every section of the grounds. If this woman had come or gone by normal means, she would have been caught on film. I spent hours combing through the recordings, 4 hours across 6 different cameras. They showed the funeral, the mourners arriving and leaving, Tommy and me doing our duties. But no sign of the woman in navy. It was as if she had never been there at all. I tried to explain it away. Maybe she'd arrived with other mourners and left the same way, managing to avoid every camera angle. Maybe she was a distant relative who slipped in and out unnoticed. Maybe my mind, heavy with grief and stress from Daniel's suicide, was projecting connections that weren't really there. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I had looked into her eyes, heard her voice, and felt the unmistakable warmth of Maria Thompson's presence. She had thanked me for taking care of Daniel during the months he was slowly dying from grief. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop replaying that moment. Her words, her smile, the way she moved, the scent of jasmine that lingered. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that something extraordinary had happened that day. Something beyond rational explanation. 3 weeks after Daniel's funeral, I was making my usual Sunday rounds when I noticed something unusual. Both Daniel's and Maria's graves had fresh flowers. Not extravagant bouquets from a florist, but simple, carefully arranged bunches of seasonal blooms, white roses mixed with baby's breath. I assumed a family member had brought them. But when I later asked Daniel's sister, she was confused. "I thought you were the one leaving them," she told me. "Daniel always said how much he appreciated the way you took care of things." But it wasn't me. And no one else I spoke to claimed responsibility. The flowers kept appearing. Every Sunday morning without fail. No matter how early I arrived, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, even once at 4:30, the flowers were already there. Fresh. Dew still clinging to their petals, as if they had been placed just moments before. Security cameras provided no answers either. I reviewed the footage week after week. Nothing. No figure approaching, no shadow, no disturbance. The flowers simply appeared between frames, as if materializing from thin air. After 3 months of frustration, I stopped trying to solve the mystery. Instead, I began to see the flowers for what they were, a gift. Not just for Daniel and Maria, but for everyone who visited that section of the cemetery. They became a symbol of enduring love, a reminder that some bonds are too strong for even death to sever. Now, 6 months after Daniel's funeral, the Sunday flowers continue. Visitors from neighboring towns come to see the love graves. People say there's a peace in that section unlike anywhere else in Greenwood Memorial. But the biggest change has been within me. For 12 years, I saw myself as little more than a caretaker of the dead. But after meeting that woman, whether ghost, spirit, or something else entirely, I understand my work differently now. Cemeteries aren't just places for the dead. They are bridges. Bridges between the living and whatever comes after. They are places where love continues, even after life itself has ended. Every Sunday morning, when I see those fresh flowers, I remember her words. That Daniel is at peace. That she is at peace. That love had found a way to endure. Whether what I experienced was supernatural or just my grief-stricken imagination doesn't matter anymore. What matters is how it changed me. Sometimes, late at night when I do my final security checks, I catch the faint scent of jasmine near Section D. And I smile, knowing that Daniel Thompson is still having his Sunday conversations with the woman he loved so completely he couldn't imagine life without her. And every Sunday, without fail, the flowers are there. A living reminder that some love stories are simply too powerful to be contained by a single lifetime. I still don't know who leaves them. I can't explain the woman I spoke to, or the peace that transformed Section D from a place of mourning into a place of hope. But I've learned something important. Not every mystery needs solving. Some are more meaningful when they remain unsolved. Maybe that's what Daniel and Maria's story really is. Not a tragedy of love cut short by death, but a triumph of love that refuses to die at all. And if that isn't worth believing in, I don't know what is.